All right. Hi, Jared.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
So
I
me and Troy, we haven't talked for a while, and we thought it'd be good to get together again and just kind of see what's been going on. And so here we are. Did you have a good 4th of July?
I did. Oh, my wife coughed. I thought she said, "Hey." Um, sorry. I did, and the reason is as I get old, I'm going to be 52 this year,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the more relaxed I am on. As I get older, I want more relaxing holidays. Less. Does this sound bad? Less children around, but I don't. Not only because my children are older now. They've grown up. I don't have grandkids yet, so I'm trying to at least rest up until I have grandkids.
It's actually really funny that you said that because yesterday we went over to another family's house for the 4th of July for just for dinner, and he said the exact same thing. He mentioned how like with the 4th of July he's getting kind of like tired of fireworks, like more so than he was because like when he was younger he really liked them. And I was like, yeah, I'm kind of like the same way. It's not just with like the 4th of July but other things. I'm just kind of like starting to kind of wind down a little bit. I'm younger than you, but like it's still just kind of like
Yeah,
starting to wear off for me. So I
you're
totally get
you're
that.
younger than me, but you're old enough to understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I had an 80-year-old man tell me at church. I said, I'm in my 50s now, Brother Leisure. Am I old? He goes, well, or no, I said, I'm still young, aren't I? Hoping that he would say I'm still young. He goes, well, you're not as old as I am, but you sure ain't young anymore. So I'll say that to you, Jared. You're not as old as I am, but you're not young anymore.
No, and I know that. And it's really funny because like I feel like just like I've been thinking a lot about the holidays for like this last year, probably because of like all the talk about Palm Sunday at the last general conference. But in like with Christmas, it was kind of like a weird Christmas for me. And a lot of my subscribers kind of felt the same way, that it felt different. And even some people here in town that aren't even members of the church, they felt like something different this Christmas. And I don't know if like just something more broad or general is going on when it comes to these holidays. Now you and I probably are in, my friend in the ward here probably are just kind of getting older and like less excited about like the things like fireworks and whatever. But I wonder if like just like something's kind of changing a little bit, because I feel like just the holidays have been kind of weird the last year. At least they have been for me. You know what I mean?
I know what you're saying, Jared. I know exactly what you're saying. And I think a lot of it has to do, well, for example, and I shared this with a couple other even leaders in my ward and stake. We were singing the national anthem last Sunday. And I usually get pretty excited, or it's a reverent thing to me. I love my country. I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in the branches of government. I do believe in that the forefathers of our country had a mission to accomplish. I don't believe, even Dallin H. Oaks and others have said, that the Constitution wasn't created perfectly, but it was inspired, but it's not a perfect document, and we've never reached the point where I don't think we've ever reached a point in our country's history since its drafting where it's been used perfectly the way it's supposed to be used.
Yeah.
So when we were listening to the national anthem and singing it, I was almost kind of saddened because in spite of me being a constitutionalist and supporting the country, there's some evil, wicked people running our country right now.
Yeah.
And and you know what I'm saying? Our military doesn't always do things. We used to be the leaders of the world, and people looked at us as an example. Now we have our military going places maybe they shouldn't be, and it's not their fault. They're being commanded by leaders at home to go do certain things, maybe that are controversial or speculative in nature. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I mourn as I listen to that national anthem. So I
Yeah.
think there's a difference there too, as far as 4th of July is concerned. But go ahead.
I think you're definitely right about that, because I kind of felt the same thing. And I guess a few years ago I was a lot more like optimistic um about the country. You know, I was more, but I don't know, I've gotten so tired. Sorry, is the audio okay?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. Um
Well, and I was also thinking you were in the military too, so you understand more than I do about
oh
all
man,
that.
so some of the briefings and stuff that they have you go through are so just like political in nature. It's ridiculous. And I'm sure it's only gotten worse since I got out. I got out in 2017. But I feel like I'm still like patriotic, but my outlook of the future for the country not so good. Now I do listen to what President Oak said, because he was talking about the future of the country, that we should look, I can't remember exactly what he said, but he said something to the effect that we should be optimistic about, yeah, I think he said we should be optimistic about the future of this country. But I'm not so sure that it's like optimistic as far as like um anything before the second coming, because
Yeah.
I think it's just going to get worse. And I tend to think that nations are in some form going to continue after the second coming, although they'll all be subjected to Christ, because everything that I've studied so far, it seems like there's still going to be some type of political boundaries and divisions. But I think it's going to be more kind of like how the United States is, where we have states that are under a federal government, whereas like the world will be under Christ, but there's still going to be different political boundaries. So I don't know if that's like what he's referring to.
That was actually from his talk, defending our divinely inspired Constitution
And
in
when was that? That was last
April
year, right?
2021. Actually,
Yeah,
it was
yeah,
2021. And I remember that talk very well too. Um, and I was thinking the same thing you were. Is our Constitution going to seem almost as though it would fail completely, and then maybe after, at the cusp of the second coming, and then after, at the time of the second coming and after, will it be salvaged? Will it be you know what I'm saying? Will it be
yeah,
saved
yeah.
and maybe fortified and enhanced, and then we go to the Council of 50. You
Hmm.
know, will there be something set up like that, to where,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, what I would like to know is, I know that they were drafting a constitution for the political kingdom of Christ, and they even came up with a flag, and that flag flies at Ensign Peak, at the base of Ensign Peak in Salt Lake City. And I'm wondering if like they still have a copy of that, or if that's just been done away with. Like I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how things actually happen, because there's not just going to be like an abrupt like, okay, now everything's done, now it's magically this new for. I think there's going to be like a realistic transition in the way that things are like rolled out. And it's probably going to be a multi-year process. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, when I see things like what happened on election day, this in 2022, we had the first ever blood moon on in election day in all of
mm-hmm.
US history. That's probably not a good sign. You know, the first time that we have a blood moon on election day, it just, for me, I feel like
I've
it's kind
never
of like the
studied.
end.
So tell me a little bit about that. I haven't been much into, what do you call that when you study the signs? Because that's very scriptural, isn't it? Studying the
Yeah.
sign and the, like the blood moons and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I
Um,
basically, rather, I mean, you can call it a blood moon, but basically just a lunar eclipse. There was a lunar eclipse on election day, which made the moon appear red, hence a blood moon.
mm-hmm.
And it's the first time that that's ever happened in US history. And
Wow.
I take that very seriously. I don't know if you've been watching what's been going on with the Canadian wildfires and the smoke that's been coming down into the US. Have you seen any of those stories?
No, but I've looked at things like that in the past, but go ahead.
Well, this year, Canada is having its worst wildfire season on record. So that already is kind of big. But there's been a lot of the smoke that's been coming down. First, it was kind of like going into the Northwest, and it was darkening the skies over New York City, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, probably Boston, but I didn't see anything about Boston. And then like a week or two later, maybe a week and a half, something like that. Uh, I don't know if like the winds kind of shifted, but now it was like more heavily coming down over like Chicago, Indianapolis, and even as far south as St. Louis, Missouri, Cleveland. So you have all these like major cities where there's this kind of like unprecedented event. And when I say that, I'm just referring to the fact that it's the largest wildfire season in Canadian history, where
Mm-hmm.
all this smoke is coming down and it's darkening the skies over major American cities. And there was even somebody in New York City that said that they couldn't tell when the sun rose because they couldn't see the sun through the thickness of the smoke. So
Okay.
the sun was darkened, the moon was
Right.
turned to blood in all these different cities. And not only that, but the smoke also carried across the Atlantic to, I think, possibly the UK, but I know for sure the Iberian Peninsula, which is Portugal and Spain. So it's like a major, major thing. So, but anyway, the fact is, I look at like these different signs, like things that are going on in the nation, political instability. In 2020, we had the Black Lives Matter, thing that happened.
Right.
There's a lot of things happening in the United States that it does not look good.
Well, I mean, and what does that mean? That the, we read about that in the book of Revelation, right? That the moon will be blood red.
Yeah.
Could that mean because there's going to be debris and smoke everywhere from wars, you know? Uh, and to pay attention to the signs in the heavens. That's what I meant. It's scriptural, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got this UFO stuff going on too.
What do you think about that? I did a
You know
video
what
about
comes
that
to my mind?
recently.
I'll tell you what comes to my mind.
Okay.
Project Bluebeam. That's what comes to my. You know what that is, right?
I do.
What?
You want to explain that to everybody just for those that aren't
Well, I
really.
haven't. It's been a while since I delved into it, and I think a couple years ago I did a video where I mentioned it. But that's basically theoretically, and there's been some whistleblowers, but whistleblowers can also be false too. We don't know. So you have, when you're studying conspiracies, you have to be very careful not to believe everything, right? Because there are true conspiracies and there are false conspiracies. But the Project Bluebeam is basically that the very last card that the globalists or cabal or whatever you want to call them are the shadow governments of the world that want to undermine nationalism, good nationalism, and the constitutions of not just our constitution, but other constitutions that have been drafted and likened unto ours. So Project Bluebeam is the very last card, will be a false, fake alien invasion. And they will use the technology, and they did, and this has been something apparently that, what was his name that was over NASA? That goes into Operation Paperclip, which is a whole other thing too, where there were German Nazi officers that came over. A lot of people don't know that started NASA, our space program. They were former officers, and one of them was, oh gosh, what was his name? The main guy. What was his name, Jared? Let me
I
look
know
it up.
exactly who you're talking about, but the name escapes me right now.
Main guy. I'm just googling main guy Operation Paperclip. Here we go.
I've
His
got to get
name.
this before you find it.
I know, right? Go. I don't. Oh, Werner von Braun.
Oh yeah.
Right, in
Yep.
1961 with fellow Operation Paperclip scientists. They came from Germany, folks. They were ex-Nazis. So we
Yeah.
killed some of them. We executed some of them in Nuremberg, right? And other trials that we had. Now I'm trying to find where you went. I lost there you are.
It's interesting because the Marvel movies, they kind of like they kind of like talk about that. That's like included in the Marvel movie.
And they make a guy like Braun. How do you say his name again?
Werner von Braun.
Werner von Braun. I'm just to say General Braun or whatever. I don't know. Mr. Braun. Okay, so anyway, not to get scatterbrained on this, but basically that he said to one of his secretaries or one of his assistants, and she's still a whistleblower, I guess. She goes around and she was talking about this, that he said the last card, like he would be just in his office and she would be doing something and she was like his assistant. I can't remember her exact title, but she would always say in these talks that he would say the last card that will be played to to implement this order out of chaos and to get people also to not believe in God anymore, right? Mm-hmm. It's very satanic, would be a false alien invasion, and it will be implemented by the technology that we have in the future. So he was saying this back in the 60s. They were like, apparently they've been planning this for years, for decades. And when I say they, I mean like whoever, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, just there's the modern day
shadow governments. Yeah. The same people that are putting Biden in office. Okay. So yeah, so it's so that's also, signs and wonders. Just because the Lord mentions signs and wonders in the sky doesn't mean that doesn't necessarily mean he's talking about signs and wonders that are true,
like natural in nature.
It could be fallacies and false things that Satan is trying to deceive us with,
or even legitimate things, because I've read on my channel a couple times a quote from Joseph Fielding Smith. It was like a big talk that he basically gave about the second coming and the times of the signs in general conference, and he talked about airplanes and satellites and those being signs in the heavens. He said that, which you probably don't like typically think of like, oh, these are signs in the heavens, but that's how Joseph Fielding Smith felt about it,
right?
And I kind of feel like I think that there could be
and it could be things. Right. It could be a plethora of things. It could be fake alien sightings. It could be the satellites and rockets and planes and jets, modern technology, right? And it could be,
but I definitely think it could be that. Like I feel like there's no limit to what they'd be willing to do or what they'd try to pull off in order to maintain power, gain power, whatever. But one main thing that I think about it, because it could be multiple things all together, like there could be several right answers, and I think one of those right answers, if you go down to a certain level, if you think about Satan and his master plan, is I really think that because he's going to be bound during the millennium, and again, that what that means is that there's not going to be people around that really listen to him, so he can't do much, so he's bound. The best thing that he can do going into the millennium is try to put ideas in our mind and try to influence us, and perhaps cast Christ as an alien, so that people will be like, the good people that move into the millennium will continue to be good, but they'll look at Christ with doubt, or the new world order with doubt, thinking, well, this was an alien invasion, I'm still agnostic. Because that's another thing that Joseph Fielding Smith said. He listed off all these different classes of people that would still be around in the millennium. There'd be Muslims, there'd be Catholics, there'd be all these different religions, but including people that are agnostic. And you think like, well, how
just
what?
Good people of the world, your neighbors that are good to you, the people that you bring tomatoes from your garden too, and then they come over and feed your pets and water your plants while you're gone, but maybe they don't believe in God.
Yeah. And so if Satan right now is able to use this UFO thing and be like, look, it's real. Like you've heard grumblings about it for decades and decades, but no, this is like real. It's starting to come out. And so then when Christ comes, those people that don't really want to believe in God, when Christ does come and he's literally there, you still have the opportunity to be like, well, I don't think that's Christ. I think it's an alien.
And
I think that's all
it's
it
gonna
is.
right. And so we go to what the prophet, our prophet today is saying, that's why it's important to have the constant guiding influence of the Holy Ghost, because the true followers of Christ, and even those who don't have the Holy Ghost but have the light of Christ, will recognize that he is the Messiah.
Yeah.
And even just good people of the earth will not be buying into that. But it's funny that you said that a false Messiah, right? A false Christ, this Project Bluebeam thing,
Yeah.
because it's going to either be that, or like you said, instead of a second coming, it will be aliens. It will be implying that there is no second coming, there is no Jesus Christ, that doctrine is false, and that we are actually being watched over by other celestial spheres that have aliens on them, and they've been watching us for eons of time. According to some, let me read this, because it's funny you brought that up at the perfect time. Project Bluebeam is a conspiracy theory about a supposed project, and some have said this, whose purpose is to create an artificial second coming, Jared, like you said, in order to control people. As per the alleged theory, the New World Order's purpose is to, there's three things, right? In this supposedly in this Project Bluebeam: to abolish all Christian and traditional religions in order to replace them with a one world religion based on the cult of personality, a man, maybe an antichrist, could be an extraterrestrial being, but not really an a fake one. Two, to abolish all national identities and national pride in order to establish a world identity and a world pride, right? We kind of see that now, that it's kind of being implemented there. And then third, to abolish the family as known today in order to replace them with individuals all working for the glory of this new world government. Because what is Satan trying? Satan knows that the millennium is coming, so he's trying to put out his false fake utopia, which is called a dystopia, right?
Yeah. Well, and I've equated that before. Did you ever watch Star Trek very much?
Yes, sometimes.
I really think that Star Trek is essentially kind of like the blueprint, or it's like their idealized future. And what I mean by that is, when you look at Star Trek, you have the United Federation of Planets, and everyone, it's basically a communist utopia where there's no longer like a currency, because replicators, which if you're not familiar with Star Trek, it's a device where you go to it and you say whatever meal you want to eat, and the computer will replicate it for you.
Yeah.
Or clothes or whatever you need. So there's like no longer any need. There's no longer scarcity.
They drank what was it called? Synthahol, remember? Instead of alcohol.
Yeah. And essentially everybody now, their motivation to work is simply to fulfill to find self-actualization. So to become an artist or be a scientist, you're really passionate about the sciences, and so maybe you join Starfleet and you go on these missions, and so, but it's all very, when you look at it, like Star Trek has a good feeling and it is a utopia and it's optimistic, but you also look at some of the subtler details, how like none of the characters on there have more than one child,
Right.
like they kind of like subtly depict that in there. Chief O'Brien, him and Kiko, I think her name is, they have one child. Dr. Crusher, she had Wesley.
Right.
Worf had Alexander. Data had a cat, but Data's a
Right.
robot. But
And
basically,
they also call that, what is that called? Predictive programming, or
yeah,
where the CIA, and that's a whole other thing. I'll finish what I'm saying real quick. But basically, that the powers that be use Hollywood to program us.
yeah. Well, I think there's multiple birds, one stone with that too, because yes, it could be to condition us. But secondly, if you're in power and you have Hollywood under your control, or you can influence it, if you have like these big plans that you want to implement, you know how people before any building is built, they'll create like a model, like a small scale model, so you can like look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's how I want the building to look like. Or you do like renderings, like for the temple, for example, they'll do temple renderings and then release that to the public. And I tend to think that Hollywood is kind of used in the same way. It could definitely condition us to think a certain way, and I'm sure that they intentionally do that in some ways. But I also think it's a way for them to like play out an idea. Like they'll be like, okay, I want to see what it would look like if there was an alien invasion. So I want you to make a movie. It needs to include these elements. Play it out. You figure out how the movie works, and then we're gonna like look at it. And then you can watch the movie, those that are coming up with some kind of plan, and be like, I didn't think about this before. Maybe we need to tweak this. Maybe we need to tweak that, you know, and maybe they could even do polls with just like people and keep the polls for themselves to like help them perfect the plan, uh, gauge people's perception of the story in the
Mm-hmm.
movie. So I feel like that'd be a very practical application. Is like you have them make a movie about your plan, and then you think about the bugs and the tweaks that you need to make for when it's time to fully implement it.
Right.
Because like, why not? Like movies are really powerful, and they can like make it really realistic, and so that might be another purpose for it. But there's definitely a lot of weird things that show up in movies that later on will become
Mm-hmm.
reality. And I don't want to go into too many details, just because like you have to be careful what you talk about on YouTube.
Right.
But
I was
there's
just
been,
thinking that too, because they uh some have even implied that, and I've watched different documentaries and some podcasters and truthers, we used to call it. Remember
yeah,
3-4 years ago, YouTube was inundated with
yeah.
truth stream medias and things, and then a lot of them got demonetized and kicked off.
And
Some of
hopefully this
them
doesn't
still.
happen with this video.
No, because we're kind of keeping it vague, as long as we're not mentioning specific names, and we're not. You notice how I said the cabal or the powers that be? You know, I've got you and I both know we can name drop organizations and Darth Vader type people that are putting people in positions here. But
Yeah.
we're not going to do that. Hold on, let me let my cat in. She's
Okay.
scratching on the door. uh I always do that because I don't want people to see how fat I am when I get up.
Well, so anyway, everyone that's here, there is a really good YouTube channel that I like to watch called the Y Files, and he goes over a bunch of different conspiracies that are out there. And he does a lot of like good debunking, because there's definitely a lot of just like nonsense out there. There's people that, like I've talked about on the channel before, there are people that aren't concerned about truth at all. So they'll like attach themselves to a certain conspiracy, not because they necessarily believe it, but because they found a knack at writing books about that conspiracy, or
Right.
doing presentations. And so you have to that. So I would recommend the Y Files, because I feel like he's done a very good job, really looking into a lot of
Who's
things.
this?
It's called the Y Files. I can't remember the guy's name, but
The other one's True Stream Media. You guys ever heard of that? That's a husband and wife team. And also Redacted. Have you ever watched Redacted?
mm-mm.
Oh wow. uh they just did a bit on and not to get into what happened with COVID. I don't want to mention that'll we've been talking about some really good stuff here, and I do not want this video destroyed. So
Yeah.
man, that would really depress me. But like another what do you call that? What do we call that just happened with a pandemic?
Yeah.
And apparently the CFR was showing a video, and I'll just keep it brief. Another training video, but it was about zombies. Anyway,
Oh,
if you
great.
guys want to know, I'll leave the link of that of Redacted. If you want to know, Jared, check it out.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then maybe in a week from now, we can maybe talk about it or something. But I'll leave the link. It was and they showed a real video that the Council on Foreign Relations was training people on, and it was talking about zombie apocalypse stuff. So
Oh,
I don't
very
know.
good.
Maybe bacteria eating people's brains. Anyway, let's go.
That's another hallmark of any disaster. I'm gonna use vague language here. Anytime there's a thing that happens, usually there's some kind of like wide scale training ahead of time, including with what happened in 2020.
Right.
Just like a couple months before that, they were actually doing like a dry run. They were doing an exercise.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Yeah.
And they do this typically and they're able to do it because just no one notices, no one like makes a big deal about it, but it happens and they're able to do it. And
yeah.
so anyway, yeah, so this 4th of July I just feel like every day it's just,
and you know what, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, this is related to the gospel. We're not saying that, not once have we said the Project Bluebeam thing is actual truth, that this is exactly what's happening. But we're supposed to be careful. And it reminds me, Jared, Elder Anderson of the Quorum of the 12 came, was it Anderson? Yes, it was Anderson. Hold on just a second. Let me look something up real quick. He came to a couple years ago. I did a little video with Levi. It wasn't Anderson. It was I always get him mixed up with oh my goodness. Help me out, Jared. No.
I get those two mixed up sometimes. Anderson and Cook.
No.
Razban?
No.
Not Bednar.
No.
Or Uchtdorf.
No, keep going. What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me?
Probably not Elder Gong.
No.
Suarez.
No, I'm just, this is what happens when you get into your 50s. Okay, so now I have to look at a picture of the Quorum of the 12. Oh my gosh. Okay.
It happens.
It's here he is. Stevenson, sorry, Elder Gary Stevenson came to our stake to talk to the youth, and my wife and I were allowed to go to that because we were in the youth. And he talked about, in the coming days, we will need the Holy Ghost, like the prophet was saying, because I think this was 2020 that he came, and he mentioned, how Satan always comes on the scene when a prophet is receiving some kind of first vision from the Savior of the Lord. And he spoke of the book of Moses, when the Lord appeared to Moses, but as Satan did also, right? And what did Moses say to Satan? I can look upon you. You don't deceive me. You can't deceive me, because I know my Heavenly Father. I know who to worship, and you're not worshipable, right?
Yeah.
So the point Gary Stevenson was making was that that in the future, he was basically saying there's going to be some things that will just try to deceive you. Now, he could have been talking about all the social ills of today, and the ideologies and indoctrinations of the times today, right?
Yeah.
Or he could have been talking about something big too. So
probably both. I would assume both, because there are a lot of people that they can't tell the difference between something that appears good and something that is good. Like, because Moses, he had to be transfigured, and in order for him to be within the presence of the Lord, because the glory of the Lord was too intense. And he mentions that a few times in that chapter. He's like, well, where's your glory? I can just see you as you are, like he just said. And so I think that some people, they pick up on like the feel good messages of like the things that they're pushing right now, like LGBTQ stuff, like, because they try and like really make it feel really good and happy. And uh they have like all this like bright imagery, whether it's a rainbow or, clouds and like, costumes and stuff like that. And some people like fall for that. They're like, this is good. These are good people. They're having fun. They're good hearted or whatever, but they can't discern between what actual good is and what it's not. And the best way that you can feel that is when you go to the temple. And interestingly, essentially what Moses had was kind of like it was basically a temple like experience, because he was on a mountain and he was in the presence of God. And mountains back in those days, whenever there wasn't a temple available, a mountain would be used as like a temple area space. And so I think that uh, probably the best thing that we can do is go to the temple, feel the glory of God that's there, because he says that his glory fills his house, and it does. And I know just so many people, including myself, many people in the comments, and I know you as well, can feel that glory when we go to the temple. And so
Right.
if you spend more time experiencing actual glory, actual the spirit, then you should be able to discern between their best attempts to make you feel good and, you know, their facade that they put on. But I think that you're probably onto something there. I'm sure there probably is some other big thing, some other card, whether it's Project Bluebeam or whether it's some kind of thing, maybe
Well,
they'll
just
like,
just these sightings without Project Bluebeam, just these things that we're seeing on the news with people seeing things in the sky that, and just the idea that the media talks about UFOs puts doubts in young people's minds right there
that's a
about
good point.
God. They don't have to take it to an umpteenth level. They can just continue. Satan just can throw these little innuendos out there and just say, oh, another sighting, and then have MSNBC and all these people, because it's weird. It's like the mainstream media has just been talking a lot about UFO sightings lately. But
Yeah.
that alone, right, can put doubt into their minds.
I wish there was some kind of like study that we could do, or some kind of like, or some study available that could tell us like what effect it's already had on everybody, whether it's
Right.
youth or anybody else. Cause
You know,
like,
it's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, cause like, yeah, some people, they're seeing all this stuff in the news. Like, yeah, it looks like there's aliens. There really are aliens. So what does that
Yeah.
say about Christianity?
Right. Right.
Probably
And
not.
right. And like I read it a little while ago, it's to possibly to abolish those traditions and to put doubts in people's minds. I liked that you mentioned Moses being that was like a temple experience. And you're not the first person that has said that, Jared. And you probably know that
Yeah.
when these prophets have these dispensational moments, like Joseph Smith, the first vision, we don't know everything that happened in the grove there. There's many different accounts. Don Bradley, he's an apologist. He talks about it as though it were an endowment. You just mentioned, what did you say when Moses had that experience? It was like a temple experience,
Yeah.
right? It could have been an endowment. That's basically what our endowments are,
Yeah.
is we're doing something in the similitude of Adam and Eve, who made covenants at an altar with Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ.
Hmm.
And we are, and we do that as though we were Adam and Eve. Moses did it. Other prophets did it. Joseph Smith did it. And every time that God appears on the scene, the adversary tries to mimic that or appear on the scene to thwart that that uh that first vision or that endowment or that whatever, that communion that's happening between that prophet at that dispensation and that time. So the Savior's coming soon, right? This where we know that. We hear it from our prophets and apostles to prepare for the second coming. That's not a cliche thing. That's reality. That's a real phrase, brothers and sisters, that President Russell M. Nelson is saying. Prepare for the Savior's coming, right? So it makes sense that Satan is also going to try to have his own second coming. However, not second coming, but his own
Is a imitation or some kind of
imitation Messiah thing or whatever
parallel plan, or yeah.
I wanted to just real quick. You were talking about
actually,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, really quick, because I had a thought and I need to say it now before I forget it. I think there may have been maybe a little slip potentially by Ronald Reagan, because and I do like Ronald Reagan. Like I'm conservative. I try and be like not too extreme, but I'm more conservative than not, obviously. Hopefully all of you know that watching my channel. But one thing that he said one time, this is like really famous. He said it. No, it wasn't at the United Nations. No, maybe it was at the United Nations. He was giving an address in the General Assembly.
I know what you're talking about, but go ahead.
And he was talking about, imagine and this was back in the days of the Soviet Union, obviously. And he was like talking about it in this context about the differences between the East and the West. And he said something to the effect, you'd have to look it up, but I'm sure a lot of you will recognize this if you're like into this kind of stuff, especially UFOs. He said, imagine how quickly our differences would disappear if suddenly we were encountered by an outside threat. And so he could have slipped a little bit of the plan just right there. Like, this is on the horizon. At some point, we're going to have this UFO thing and we're going to cast them as hostile. And it's going to bring the world together like never before. We're going to drop all of our differences. And that kind of sets the stage potentially for the Earth becoming kind of like a United Federation of Planets, not with multiple planets, but United Federation of countries, the United Nations. And
that the human race no longer is divided by race, but we are one race called the human race.
Yeah.
Right.
And no more nations. Like, we need to stop fighting each other. We need to stop being nation against nation. So everyone needs to get rid of their
right. Well, I mean, and could it be that they're trying to be that maybe they're justifying it by saying, well, if we do this fake alien invasion, this will get people to come together and it will prepare them for our utopia.
Yeah. And then they would obviously consolidate power, I would imagine, because you would make the case for, well, we need to have planetary defense. Like, if we have these other worlds, we need to have a planetary military, an Earth military for Earth, united military. And obviously, whenever power is consolidated, it's usually not a good thing because like when it's dispersed, when power is dispersed, that's when there's checks and balances. That's the whole idea behind the Constitution, is you separate the powers. But whenever you bring powers together into like one place, that's where we get into dangerous territory, because less and less people have access to that power and can misuse it, obviously. So so yeah, that's an interesting thing to think about. And I would not be surprised at all if this kind of thing happens, because it seems like it's just weird all of the sudden, after decades of people seeing things, decades of all these like big stories, like all of a sudden right now it's becoming like a big thing. It just feels very scripted. It's just like,
well, and
it's so silly.
It's funny because I forgot about Project Bluebeam. It just kind of went away, because I tell people ask me, do you believe in conspiracy, or are you a conspiracy theorist? And I go, well, I do believe that there are theories on conspiracies, and I believe in some of those theories. Yes, I do. But I also know that one way to make people, to discredit all of those conspiracies is to mingle them with false conspiracies. So you throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
So people
Well, and that's
yeah.
why I was bringing up Y files. If he does a really good job at like debunking a lot of them, but he doesn't like debunk everything. He's not like against conspiracies. He's like, we need to get rid of the ones that are just like not true, and then the ones that are true that remain, that's like what we should focus on. So,
I'm gonna
and
leave
by the
his
way, that's how
link.
I originally came across your channel, by the way.
Oh, really?
Because because back in those days, I don't know if it was 2017, maybe it was 2018. I'm not sure exactly when, but I came across your channel because I was wanting to see like an LDS perspective on these things. So I came across Brother Guerrero, came across you, and I think
So
that was
that
pretty
was
much
kind
it.
of when I was talking about some of these things then, right?
Yeah, I think this was like at the very beginning of your channel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is kind of corny when I go back and look. It's really corny.
Mine
Some of
too.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. The only way you can do, you just have to start and then you just get better with time.
Okay, so I'm going to leave that link with Redacted. I'm going to leave that link and Y files. I just looked it up. I'm looking at the channel right now, so I'll leave that link. And I'm sure you're going to maybe leave some links too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'll do it.
You should look up Redacted also. I'll
Okay.
send you the link, or you could copy and paste the link that I'll put for that specific video about the zombie apocalypse stuff. And now, and folks, they're not implying that there's going to be real zombies. What they're saying is there's going to be, that it's possible that there could be something where people are acting like zombies. I don't think, I don't believe in the undead. I don't think we've gotten to that point. I'm just saying, it's interesting. Just check it out. I'll leave the link. But also, I wanted to share this with you. I wanted to read this because we were talking about the Constitution, right? And what Elder Oaks was mentioning about the Constitution.
Yeah, because I guess like the theme of this is mostly, the current condition and future of the United States, but it kind of bleeds into all these other things.
Well, here's the neat thing that can probably put in your mind and in your heart that our Constitution is still inspired, and that our Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ feel that it's going to be an important document still. Okay. And here's one thing that Elder Oaks said, President Oaks, sorry. He says, in these remarks, I do not speak for any political party or other group. I speak for the United States Constitution, which I have studied for more than 60 years. That's older than I am. I speak from my experience as a law clerk to the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. I speak from my 15 years as a professor of law and my 3.5 years as a justice on the Utah Supreme Court. And this is the part I like more than anything, Jared, which tells me that they are watching the Constitution. If anybody believes that our men on these 12 or these 15 men are apolitical, I don't believe that. Not because other nations aren't important, not because other members, that there aren't members of the church all over the world, but why is the United States Constitution still important? Because the church headquarters is here. Okay. And this is Zion. And there will be two capitals. One, this will be where the law comes from, and Jerusalem will be where the gospel comes from. So here's what he says, this last sentence right here. Most important, I speak from 37 years as an apostle of Jesus Christ, responsible to study the meaning of the divinely inspired United States Constitution to the work of his restored church. He's saying right there, as an apostle, I'm responsible to study the Constitution.
Yeah.
Isn't that neat?
It is. And recently, wasn't it a couple of weeks ago that they put out that letter in church during like sacrament meeting where the first presidency put out a message about our responsibility to be engaged in the political process, to avoid, I can't remember what the phrase is, but like when you only vote just based on party affiliation. So what they
Oh,
call it, like a straight line vote or something like that.
okay. I'm
Or
not sure, but to avoid bipartisanship, basically.
I guess just like when you go to the polls, don't just vote based on party. Like, oh, I'm all
Study the
Republicans.
issues.
Yeah, study the issues. Make sure that actual good people get in. And I understand that that's hard because and I'm gonna be honest. I've always done straight line voting.
Yeah.
Or always just like, nope, no Democrats, only Republicans. But
I'm like, babe, who are we voting for? She's like, vote on this proposition. Okay.
yeah. So we do have to be responsible and like learn about like the different propositions, and also, judges. And that's where it gets a little harder for me. It's like, what? I don't know. I don't know. Who is this person? Um, but then also, and this might be the tougher one, is to make sure to give a fair look to the other side, because maybe um someone that's a Democrat, I'm speaking from my own point of view, maybe they are a more honest person, even though I guess you have to like weigh what will be the greater good. Because if you have one person that seems like maybe they're already purchased by other influences, other
Yeah.
powers that be, maybe that's not the best person to have in office, someone
Right.
that's like
Yeah.
under the control of
What
others. And
how are they voting in Congress? That's the way to look too. How are they
yeah.
voting in Congress? What is their voting record?
Well,
Uh
and you have this phenomena of like people that are, Democrat or Republican, but in name only. So like the rhinos, Republican in name only. I don't know if there's dinos Democrat in name only, but that might be part of it. And that might be part of the problem, is like people that have power are able to help other people get into office, and like, here, we're gonna have you run as a Republican, and but you're gonna,
I
work
think
for,
Tulsi Gabbard would be like a dino.
really.
I don't think she's a Democrat anymore. Maybe I think she
I
moved
recognize
over.
that name, but I should be more involved
It's
with it. I
okay.
just
Well,
I hate watching. I hate politics. I try and be involved, but it's just I find it so toxic, and I just hate that whole world of like arguing about things. And there
and these
does,
narcissistic people just going back and forth.
yeah,
I know it's so true. I don't pay attention that much either. I do enough to vote for the right person, but what you just said a few minutes ago, I need to take more time and study the issues and stop voting party affiliation only.
yeah. And this is like, okay, so here's an area where um we have to be careful when it comes to conspiracies and stuff, because you might think a certain conspiracy is right, and therefore you can't trust anybody. I feel like there's a lot of that right now. I hear time and time again, you can't trust anybody. That might be partially true. I'm not sure if it's fully true. I think that we're still expected to use the information that's available to us and try and make the right decision, not to withdraw from the political process. And like I've talked about on my channel before, basically don't become a zealot. The zealots were a sect of Judaism at the time of Christ where they completely withdrew. They were completely belligerent against not only the Romans, that was like the main enemy, but also against fellow Jews that wanted to work with the Romans. You can't like become this like recluse and just completely withdraw. That doesn't do anybody any good. Um,
Well,
and
like
that's what we're not, and that's what we're counseled to do by the general authorities, is to be engaged, just do the best that we can. But you can't just withdraw from society. You can't just withdraw from the political process. Unfortunately, as much as I would like
right.
to, we can't do that.
Well, like my brother, he got involved in local politics, and that's where sometimes doing things on a local level can have an impact on bigger levels. If you start on local levels, like even in your school boards, with all the garbage with the book reading and the story time stuff and all that
For
stuff.
heaven's sake, yeah.
Fortunately, I live in a conservative part of California. A lot of people think that where just because you're from California doesn't mean you're San Francisco and LA. Those are just as foreign to the Central Valley as they are to you. A lot of people don't realize it's like New York City is not upper state New York. Yeah. Same thing with Central California. So my brother joined, but there's still some things we're trying to iron out. So my brother got involved in the school board. He's just been voted on. I don't know how it works really because I don't have young kids anymore, but he does. But if you got involved locally with small time politics and your districts and your, not just the governor, state politics, but assemblymen and congressmen and senators and things like that. That's where it's got to.
I don't know. That's asking a lot, Troy.
I mean?
I already can't hardly manage this YouTube channel.
I know.
Let alone the city.
At least vote, right?
School district.
Study the issues, like you said.
Yeah. Although I would want to make this call really quick since we're talking about this. Any of you that feel so inclined, please do so. Because maybe not all of us have to become, be on the board or city council members or mayors or whatever. But like, if you feel like that's up your alley, and if you've had promptings, well, if you've had promptings, do it, because you're not being prompted for nothing.
Right.
So, but maybe we all need to like look inside of ourselves and see where we can do better. Because the Lord in the end could be like, well, what did you expect? You didn't do anything. You think everything's going to go right. Everyone's going to do it for you. And you're just going to sit back and just enjoy it all. Like you, the way that this life works is like, if you want things to happen, you have to do it. It's kind of like the whole thing. Like if you want it done right, you have to do it yourself, which you have to be careful of that because you don't want to be a micromanager in certain situations. But like for your own personal life, for example, you and me doing this YouTube channel, one of the main reasons why I wanted to do it, and I was thinking about it, is like there were things that I wanted to say, and I felt like there were just certain areas that needed to be covered more, and no one was going to do it unless I did it. And so it's like,
I'll tell you what, Jared, you really took off. When I first met you, I was like, like when you meet other people that get kind of zealous about doing a YouTube channel and then they do it for a while and then they fade away. When I first met you, I didn't know you, and I'm like, okay, yeah, he wants to, like everyone else, we'll see how he does. And you sure have not had, you still have a lot to say. And and I admire that you stay tapped in, and especially with what's going on in the Middle East.
Yeah.
What's going on now? I mean, what with the drone stuff? What's all that about?
Yeah, so it's been kind of a rocky year for Israel. It kind of started out with like this whole thing about the judicial overhaul, because interestingly, and this is actually a good segue, Israel does not have a constitution. Their law is based on the Declaration of Independence.
Right.
So it's,
well, they have a constitution, but they don't have amendments like we do.
No, they don't have a constitution.
Oh, they just have okay, that's right.
And that's,
but they have a democracy.
Yeah. They have a democracy.
But it's very experimental, right?
Yeah. And that reminds me of video.
And then Benjamin Netanyahu's been under scrutiny because he's like, no, we need to make something more solid, right?
Yeah. So there's a video. I don't know if I already have it on my playlist called recommended videos. I have a playlist of like videos from other channels that I think are just really good.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one guy that explained it very well. I was recommended to this video by Rabbi Gerfine. He's the guy that I talk to every other week. In fact, I'm going to be talking to him tomorrow. But this YouTube channel that I watched, the way that he explained it is that when Israel became a nation, they didn't want to come up with a constitution right away, because it was a very small amount of Jews that were in Israel. And so they figured, okay, well, we should probably wait until more of the exiles come back. And then at some future time, we'll do a constitution. And it seems like they've had a government that's somewhat, it resembles a constitutional government, because from what I can tell, they have an executive branch, they have a legislative branch, which is the Knesset, and they also have the judicial. But what Benjamin Netanyahu has wanted to do lately is him and his party, as well as a lot of the ultra Orthodox, feel that the judicial branch has had too much power, unlike other nations in the world. And so
Right.
they
And
wanted,
a lot of them that have that power are kind of woke and kind of on the left, right?
yeah, I think so. That's the feeling that
And
I
so they're
get.
making it look like Benjamin Netanyahu is just some tyrant that wants to change things and take people's democracy away, and that's not the case.
Yeah. So you
Sorry,
have a lot of
I'm over
people.
speaking.
No, no. Yeah, so you have a lot of people from Tel Aviv, which is like the more liberal area, that are like, there's been huge protests. And so much so, it got to a point where Benjamin Netanyahu released, or he dismissed, the defense minister, Gallant. But that ended up not happening, because as that was happening, there was like a big flare up that was, that started with some stuff that happened on the Temple Mount, and they ended up launching Operation Shield and Arrow, uh,
Right.
which I thought was going to be bigger than it
But
was.
that
But
happens every year, doesn't it? Isn't there always unrests there at the
there is, but
Is that when they actually went inside the Dome of the Rock and arrested people?
I think there's only been a couple times that that's happened. Once, I can't remember if it was 2021 or 2022, but it was a big deal, and they did it again this year. Iran is making a lot of moves. So that was like the big fear, because Iran is essentially kind of like realigning the Middle East. Like they're bringing Saudi Arabia more into their orbit, or into their sphere of influence. And Saudi Arabia is going along with it, which they were more, less antagonistic toward
Yeah,
Israel.
they've always been pro-Israel, I guess you would say.
Yeah, more like on the side of Israel and the US.
Right.
But now, no. Um, and Iran has been like doing a lot of moves with its like proxies in and around Israel. And so Israel's been talking about how like these like smaller skirmishes are probably going to become less normal, and they're probably going to end up having a multi-front war, uh, pretty much directed mostly by Iran.
And that's weird
So
because it's mostly been Shiites that are anti-Israel, right? Or am I getting that mixed up?
I think so.
What
Yeah, well,
what
because
Saudi
Iran,
Arabia are mainly Sunnis, right?
yeah, and
Okay.
Iran is Shiite, but it feels like they're kind of like coming together, and that's like the thing that's kind of concerning.
That's scary.
Yeah. Um. So anyway, right now, so there was that operation earlier this year, and after that, it doesn't seem like much has happened as far as like the judicial reforms go. But recently, there was another protest at Ben Gurion Airport, which almost threatened to shut the airport down. So it's still kind of like on the back burner. But I haven't heard much news about the judicial overhaul. And then right now, as we speak, well, I haven't checked the news today, but I think as we speak, they're doing operations in the West Bank, in a city called Jenin, because there have been groups there starting to like ramp up their operations, like producing bombs and rockets and stuff like that. And I think there were two rockets that were sent off, but they didn't actually make it into Israeli territory, although the intended target was Tel Aviv. So when that happened, I think that's what prompted the IDF to go into Jenin, and they're doing like this big operation right now to take out those cells that are starting to like become active there.
Right.
And from what I've seen, it's like the largest scale uh conflict in the West Bank, in 20 years. So that's kind of like a major thing that's happening right now. I don't know how that's going to play out, but so this year, I feel like it's been pretty bad
Hold
relative
on,
to other
hold that
years.
thought. Hold that thought.
Okay.
Hold on.
Okay. All right, we'll
Sorry.
do. So
Hold on.
yeah. So everybody else. So I think it definitely is important to watch Israel because, and I've said this so many times on my channel,
I'm back.
at any given time, we could find ourselves in that final phase of the war. And I still hold that the final war, I really think that it's basically been going on since the inception of Israel. It's such a big war that it's subdivided into other wars and other operations and skirmishes and stuff. And so I think before people know it, we're going to be in that final couple
Well,
battles, the Battle of Armageddon and then the siege on Jerusalem.
well,
Sorry,
I was going to ask you, that's the question. I have a question about that for you.
yeah.
So I've done videos like that where we understand scriptures that talk about being invaded by the countries of the north, right? Gog and Magog come to get a spoil. Is it Rosh? Is Rosh Russia? Is it talking about China and Russia? Is that Gog and Magog? Well, no, because some say that Gog is actually a leader, or is it Magog is a leader? Magog's a country.
Gog is the person,
leader of
and Magog is
right?
the country.
Right. And then others say Gog and Magog are two different countries. I don't think that's what that means, but I don't know. So, and then other biblical scholars, and you can learn a lot from evangelicals talk about this a lot. Is it Russia will invade first and then China, or let me ask you this: does it have nothing to do with Russia and China being the countries of the north? And are we talking directly to maybe Syria being the countries of the north, Turkey and all those other countries invading? What do you think? What do you think is going in your mind's eye, and what you're seeing going on with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, and all of these other things going on?
The way that
think that, and also, do you think the United States is going to be in that war, either defending or being against, and maybe against because we'll have wicked leaders that are military industrial complex sending our military over there? Anyway, loaded question, go.
Well, if I had to guess, and it would obviously just be a guess, so I'm not saying that this is doctrine. This is just like from my point of view. I first look at the scriptures that say that for those that aren't watching, the second coming is going to come as a thief in the night, and that he comes at an hour that you think not. And that part, when he says he's going to come at an hour you think not, it seems like that's directed toward us that are members of the church, that will have like an idea that it's happening, like the woman in travail, that she's having the baby. But so I feel like that's like the first thing to understand, because if all of a sudden there was like a huge world war and Israel became the focus of the war, I feel like that would alert a lot of people, and he wouldn't come as a thief in the night. So I feel like in order for
he's going to come as he's going to come as a thief in the night. It possibly could mean to the wicked that aren't studying the signs, right?
Yeah, that could be, but I feel like there's some people that may be kind of like middle people, like in the church, for example, or even in Christianity, where they're not like inactive, they haven't like fallen away from religion, but they're kind of asleep. I feel like it would wake too many of those up, like, because I feel like the purpose is to be like, hey, are you going to be watching the signs? Are you? So I don't know,
because the wicked aren't studying the scriptures. So who is he speaking to? He's speaking to those who know the scriptures, right?
Yeah,
He's speaking to those who read these verses. So he's
yeah,
speaking to the virgins that don't have oil in their lamp. He's speaking to the members of the church that aren't ready for that, possibly, or he could be speaking to the world.
he could be. I don't know, but I just tend to think that there's probably going to be all of a sudden a massive flare up. I think that, like I said, I feel like this entire, in fact, they have separate articles talking about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and then there's a subcategory of that, which is the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And I feel like what that is it's actually the war. Israel has basically been in a constant state of war since the beginning. And if I were to guess, I feel like at some point the alliances are going to be tight enough, the support or the unification against Israel is going to be strong enough to where they're just going to finally do it. And I think it's going to be really quick. And it feels like that's what they're trying. That's what Iran is gearing up to do, probably with the support of Russia and China. Yeah, I did a video recently looking at all the different numbers, all the deaths from terrorist attacks, all the deaths in all these different skirmishes, both on the Israeli side and on the Arab side from all these different countries. You add it all together, it adds up to a war, a big war. And then I also, in that same video, looked at, there's an article put out by, I think it's on myjewishlearning.com, I want to say. They pretty much they put together this part of their website where they take a tally of like all the different votes in the UN against Israel, like just a whole list of all these like resolutions. And any given resolution, the vast majority of countries vote against Israeli interests. So I feel like this whole time, the whole world, generally
Right.
speaking, has been against Israel. And as we move forward, it seems like things are getting worse and worse for Israel as like different sides are starting to align themselves against Israel.
And the globalist community seems to side with the Arab nations.
Yeah, they do.
Do you think it's because of natural resources? Is the spoil oil? Is the spoil oil?
I have no idea. There's probably a bunch of different reasons. I assume that one of the reasons would be, the fight against nationalism, because
Right.
Israel
Is nationalist.
they want the whole idea is for them to have their own country, and so that would go against the globalist plan. So it may be nothing more than that, but there's probably like other objectives too.
Right.
So I think
Lots
that
of layers.
I think like what's going on right now with Russia in Ukraine, I think that that's a big deal, because that's essentially what it really is, I think, is a big fight, a conventional war uh, against those that are still nationalists and against the globalists. I view it as like a nationalist globalist war, essentially.
Be careful. Be careful with that.
Yeah, I know.
You know why.
Yeah, I do. I do. So
just a friendly.
I think this conflict is something that is starting to galvanize the ties between Russia, China, Iran, and those that are part of that group. And therefore, because there's this big distraction, this big war that's going on, in my view, I think that it's taking the focus away from Israel. The United States and the globalists cannot afford to really, well, the United States cannot really afford to like give all of its attention toward Israel. It's being distracted by China and Russia. And so basically what I'm trying to say is like all the pieces are coming together like a perfect storm almost, to where Israel is kind of like by itself. It can't depend that much on the United States. And that's a prime time for Israel's enemies that are serious about wiping it out to wipe it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. While you in the West are distracted with Russia and whatever, we're gonna go
distracted with our own garbage internally too.
Yeah.
With all the social unrests.
Yep.
And the ideological warfare going on as well.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of warfare going on. And this is something I kind of talk about a lot on my channel, is like, I feel like the nature of war has changed. Like there still is conventional war, like what we see in Ukraine, but there's been all sorts of things going on with the weather, with earthquakes, with meteors. I've talked about the idea because like, that both Russia and the United States and possibly even the European Space Agency, but I know Russia and the US for sure, they've been working on these programs to deflect asteroids away from Earth. And I had this thought, because of the timing of certain asteroids, what if like they've actually weaponized that too? And they're sending asteroids at each other, because before the Crimean, when they annexed Crimea back in, I think it was 2014 2013 or 2014. I think it was 2014. Just shortly before that, that's when you had the Chelyabinsk meteor in Russia. It was like this, I don't know if you saw videos about it, but it was this huge Russian meteor. It had the
I
explosive
think
yield.
I vaguely remember something like that.
It had the explosive yield of nuclear bombs. And it didn't damage like a whole lot of things, but it was terrifying. And it did damage some buildings. It did cause injuries, but I almost wonder if like that was kind of like a warning from the West to Russia. But you know, the thing that's really interesting is this year, 10 years to the day, there was a meteor in Texas on the same day that the Chelyabinsk meteor hit Russia. And then after that, at the time of the Super Bowl, there was a meteor over the UK, in France, and Belgium. And then after that, there was a very rare daytime meteor that was over Israel. And it created a boom. All these created booms, which is more on the rare side
Mm-hmm.
for them to actually cause an audible boom. And so I tend to think, or at least I wouldn't be surprised if that's been weaponized, if weather has been weaponized. And then on top of that, there's this idea of color revolutions. And that's been an ongoing thing basically this entire century so far, where I think that they've realized how to manipulate social media and other aspects of society to where you don't have to go and invade a country. You can just cause turmoil through psychological means. Um, for example, there was the Arab Spring, and there you can go through this Wikipedia article that talks about all the different countries that had major upheavals and uprisings and the results of those uprisings. And Russia actually talked about it. I went over this really interesting article that talked about this like defense meeting that Russia was having, and they were talking about how the West has weaponized these revolutions, and they know how to cause instability in countries in order to reshape them the way that they want. And interestingly, that's what was happening in Ukraine before Crimea was taken. There was this, I can't remember what it was called. They gave it a color, I think, but they basically got rid of the standing Ukrainian prime minister that was pro-Russian. He was sent into exile. And then that after that, that's when Russia invaded and took Crimea
Mm-hmm.
in response to that. And then that led to what's happening right now. But and then it's such like a big topic. It's hard to talk about it all. But I think that there's a lot of things. Essentially, I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if we're in World War III right now. It's like a war that we don't even recognize because so many different things that we're not used to are
We're
happening.
already in it, even though it's not as escalated as it will become. Is
Right.
that what you're saying? We're at the beginnings of it.
Well, I don't know. I feel like the beginnings were potentially in 2001 with that thing that
Right,
happened.
right, right.
George, I have an article I could pull it up sometime, but I did a video about it where he said talking about I can't remember the name of the flight 93, the one that went into the Pennsylvania field.
Were you going to say George Norrie?
No, George Bush.
Oh,
George Bush, he said that the passengers that fought back in that hijacking,
yeah.
that was the first successful counteroffensive in World War III. And that was in ABC News. It wasn't in like some obscure place.
Right.
You can find it in the Wayback Machine. It's that website where you can go back to earlier iterations of the internet.
Right.
I think that since that time, uh, essentially World War III has been going on. They even came up with the global war on terrorism, which if you go and look at it, it hasn't ended. They haven't set an end date to that. But I feel like what happened in that year is tied to what happened like 11 years later in the Arab Spring. Uh man, there's just so much. I can't
I
cover it all
know.
here.
And a few years ago I was delving deep in it, and when you as you say these things, it resurrects, thoughts from the recent past where even is it Joel uh
The one
Skousen?
that,
The
oh,
Skousen, one of the Skousens, I can't remember, studied it pretty intensely, 9/11. And uh what were
better
you
not say
gonna?
too much. Better not say too much.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
That's
So
like one of the ones that
let me,
you're not allowed to talk about.
I was almost wanting to tell you to time out it too, but you were all right with that. And then the Ukraine thing, I'm like, oh,
I guess we'll
no,
just have to roll the dice and see
right.
what happens
I
on
don't
this
know.
video.
I basically think that bottom line is one guy. Let me just put it this way. And yes, the George Bush thing and all that stuff, we're not going to, bottom line, we're going to have all the details someday and we're going to know what was going on. Right now, it's so convoluted. Satan wants to confuse us. And what do? We just stay close to the Lord and the scriptures, as simple as it sounds. But I was going to say that one leader right now from that one country that everybody is supposed to hate, we're supposed to hate him. I'm not saying he's benevolent. I'm not saying he's a great guy, but I'm also saying he brings stability to his country and he's got an 85% approval rating from his people. I don't know how you feel about this, Jared, but all I'm
There,
saying is I think Crimea, sorry. I think that other little place, some of them wanted that to be a part of that other country that we're supposed to hate, right? And that leader we're supposed to hate.
we're getting we're getting in it deep now,
But you
Troy.
agree with me on that, right? Kind of. I don't
I
know.
think so. I kind of think along those lines, but
They
I
wanted to
also
be annexed, some of them.
I also entertain the idea. By the way, we're both drinking Costco water. We were talking
Right.
about that before we started the recording.
Good old
Um,
Kirtland.
I'm also open to the idea that there's not really any good people, that there's not really any
Well,
good
yeah,
sides when it
like I
comes
said,
down to it.
I'm not saying that that leader is benevolent, but I'm also
Yeah,
not saying that the other guy that's popular with the globalists right now is
yeah,
he's not a that's not democracy, and we keep saying it's democracy in doing things in the name of democracy, but they're not a democracy. He's
yeah,
just as dictatory as the other guy. But
yeah.
anyway,
So I think it's all very complex. I always try to avoid being a black and white thinker because sometimes like these like situations are so hard that you want to like simplify it and just be like, oh, good and bad. But I think that there's a lot of
it's
shades
not
of
black and
gray.
white, right? And
I think,
and then you can also say that, you know, I think that a lot of the politicians on the in the globalist community, and not just global, all politicians and government people and uh military leaders, they use that old what the ends justifies the means, but
yeah,
we can
yeah,
also take that too far, you know.
mhm,
Don't bad guys say that a lot? Well,
yeah,
we've got to kill millions of people so that we could feed the other millions of people. You know, that doesn't mean that's good and you should do that,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's what the old Soviet Union did,
yeah,
you know. So where does that line end and begin sometimes, you know? Where does the ends justifies the means, or also the phrase, you know, the lesser of two evil ideas, you know, what where does that
yeah,
end to begin? You know, there are nuances, but I think there is also good and evil.
yeah,
And we don't compromise with evil. And that's what it comes down to.
yeah. So I think the way that we got to approach it, and I think it was perfect. I recently read through the book of Daniel on the channel. I went chapter by chapter, and it's really, I feel like it's very informative of how we should be as Latter-day Saints, because we're essentially in captivity. We're just as much in captivity as Daniel and the Jews were in Babylon. And what he did, and what's their names? Shadrach, Meshach,
Meshach and
and
Abednego.
Abednego. What they did is, while they were in captivity, they served, and they tried to be good citizens, although they didn't go back on their values. They didn't break the commandments. Whenever something came up that required them to break the commandments, whether it was worshiping King Nebuchadnezzar's statue, or whether it was eating non-kosher food, they held their ground on that. But in every other way, they tried to serve. You know, they recognized that the Lord allowed this to happen. The Lord allowed the Babylonians to defeat Israel, destroy the temple. And so what you do is, and Ammon does this too. Ammon in the Book of Mormon, he is a servant to what would be traditionally considered an enemy to the Nephites. He served, and he loved, and they were engaged. In the case of Daniel and the others, they were engaged. They were in positions of authority in the Babylonian Empire. They held civic offices. And so some people, again, they tend to really withdraw, become zealots, and like be all against,
Right.
everything. But you can't
You
do
can't
that.
do that.
That's
Just
not
like
what.
the United Nations, we're involved. The church does business with the United Nations because they
Yes.
help us feed the world. And
Yeah.
not everybody in the United Nations are Gadianton robbers. Some
Yeah.
of them are, but some of them aren't. Just like not everybody in the FBI are Gadianton robbers. Not everybody in the CIA is Gadianton robbers. And and the CFR and the NSA, and you
And
know what I mean?
Christ said, in regards to your enemies, agree with them while thou art in the way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
it's like you try and find common ground. You try and avoid worse things down the road. You try to introduce stability rather than further chaos. And we also know, I can't remember where I don't know if this is in the Doctrine and Covenants or somewhere else, but there's the scripture that says that the pit that the wicked are digging for the righteous in the last days, it's that same pit that they're going to fall into themselves.
Right.
And the things that they're trying to do, their little schemes and their plans, is going to be turned around. So that's why when I look at the United Nations,
Or fools mock, but they shall mourn. That's
mhm,
another one too.
that's why when I look at the United Nations, yes, yeah, in some ways I see a monstrosity and I see horrible things, but I also see the potential for good. And I don't think that when Christ comes, it's just going to be magically everyone's going to, he's not going to do three things through magic means. Just like
No,
how he requires us
to work.
to do the
We're still
legwork.
going to put our shoulder to the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to we know what's going. We're Latter-day Saints. We have the Holy Ghost. We have the spirit of discernment. We understand when Christ comes that he is going to oversee things. He's going to preside, but he's still going to have, we're not going to just sit back and watch heavenly resurrected beings and Christ build Zion, build the new utopia, build the
Yeah.
millennium. We're going to we're going to bend our plowshares into, or how's it go? We're gonna bend our swords. We're gonna
Swords into plowshares.
we're gonna turn our tanks into washing machines, right?
Yeah,
And our
exactly.
bazookas into flower pots, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying.
And our gas masks into um
Shiny,
I,
happy,
um
fun things.
underwater goggles for when you go swimming.
Right. But we're gonna do the work, right? Even, and the
Yeah,
Lord will preside. And I'm sure
exactly.
he's not going to be sitting on a throne for 1,000 years because he would get throne sores
Exactly.
after a while. So anyway,
And so like when we're looking at the United Nations, like you can see it as like a pit that they're digging for us, for the world, for those that value sovereignty, for those that value faith, family, religion. But that pit, they're going to fall into it. And then I could see the Lord using the United Nations, transforming it into his own organization, perfecting it, you know, and then using that infrastructure that's already built and that everybody's already familiar with, using that to administer his kingdom. He would be king. It would be a theocracy. I've called it before. I think the best term for it would be, uh, what did I call it? A constitutional or a constitutional theocratic monarchy. So there would be a constitution. Uh, the government would be based on Christ. He would be the king, and it would be religious in nature, but it would permit for everyone to believe how they will.
Yeah.
In the first part of the millennium, there's going to be all these different religions still, and we're going to have to wait until okay, that sounds bad.
No, I agree with that. I don't think that okay, we learn, like Bruce R. McConkie talks about there being different religions and different faiths on the earth, and even some who are agnostic and atheist, right?
Mm-hmm.
It being Christ-like is not your name on the records of a church. Being Christ-like is, well, it is. I'm not saying we don't have ordinances, but being Christ-like is just being good. Good people will be on the earth, period, right? But I agree with you, Jared. I don't think that's going to be for the whole 1,000 years. I think after at least a few hundred years, or 100 of the first 200 years, you're going to see a lot of diverse groups. But as missionary work continues and temples are spreading the earth, I think the membership is going to increase. Would you say?
Yeah, because that's what I read. I can't remember. It seems like it's always Joseph Fielding Smith and Bruce R. McConkie that basically cover everything. But I think between the two of them, they've essentially said that in the beginning, you're going to have all the different groups, but through the process of time, the older generations are going to die. And then as time goes on, eventually everybody will be converted to the church. So, and who knows how long that's going to take? Yeah, maybe it's going to be like 100 years, 200 years, could be a little while, but most of the millennium, at some point, we're going to reach that threshold where everybody is a member of the church. Absolutely. And that'll be a great day. But for that beginning part, that's why I think that Christ would probably would step in and use, I'm sure that he inspired the Constitution for the United States, which in turn blessed the rest of the world, because most countries have a constitution formatted after the US Constitution. And the United Nations is basically kind of formatted, or it was structured according to the way that the United States works. Essentially, it's basically like a world United States, not the United States, it's the United Nations. And there's a charter, right? That's basically what the Constitution is of the United Nations. It's the UN Charter. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah.
It's like no one really knows how the UN works. It's like it's basically just a joke. But
well, I mean, because there's too many things. Like before, it used to be what was it called? The League of Nations.
Yeah.
Right. And then after World War II, they changed it to, I don't know why they would change it, but I don't know all about it. But I know there was reasons why they changed it to the United Nations. Before it was the League of Nations. And then they're the ones that kind of voted on the Jews going back to their homeland. But yeah, it's funny you brought that up, because what were you saying that President Oaks said about how what was the thing you were trying to remember that he said about the Constitution?
Just that we should, I'm going to look it up because I can find it really quick.
I've got the talk in front of me, so I'm kind of scrolling through it.
Well, I'm going to look at my.
Oh, here's something. We should learn and advocate the inspired principles of the Constitution. We should seek out and support wise and good persons who will support. No, that wasn't it that you were talking about, though.
Okay, this is it right here.
Okay.
And it looks like this is actually from a different talk. This is from April 2021.
Okay.
And it's a talk called Defending Our Divinely Inspired
Yeah, no,
Constitution.
that's the one.
Oh, it is?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the same one. Go ahead though.
So it says, our belief in divine inspiration gives Latter-day Saints a unique responsibility to uphold and defend the United States Constitution and principles of constitutionalism wherever we live. We should trust in the Lord and be positive about this nation's future. So, because there's a lot of people that are very negative, and I know that the tone of this has been kind of more on the negative side, as we've talked about secret combinations and plots and plans and schemes, and how successful they've been. But President Oaks is telling us to be optimistic about this nation's future. And again, I don't know if that's because it's going to have a very optimistic future once the second coming happens, and once we have like a perfect constitution, a perfect world constitution, a perfect government under Christ. And maybe at that point, the United States will still exist, but not as a sovereign country, just as a division of the nation. Because everyone, I think this is like a misconception. I think everyone thinks that there's going to be no more countries whatsoever, because there's many scriptures that talk about the end of nations and kingdoms and whatever. But there's also scriptures that talk about how Christ will rule the nations after the second coming. So
Right.
I think what it's referring to is like how countries are currently organized, how they're sovereign, how, you know, they've been in league with the horror of the earth. But after the second coming, there's probably still going to be nations, but they'll be subject to Christ's government.
Yeah. Well, and President Oaks in that talk even says we do not see inspiration in every Supreme Court decision interpreting the Constitution. He talks about J. Reuben Clark saying that the Constitution was not a fully grown document, that we believe it must grow and develop. So there's possibly it's going to change and be something different, but it'll still be the Constitution, but it's going to be it's going to involve other worldly it's going to involve the world, not just America.
Yeah, well, I think essentially what we see in the United States, how the US is it's a union of states, and the states are subject to the federal government. I think it's going to be the same thing when Christ comes. It's just going to level up. Like, you're going to have the world government, which will be the new federal government, essentially, for lack of a better term. And then all the countries of the world will then become kind of like states as we experience them here in the United States. So there's probably still going to be a United States Constitution, you know, in the millennium, just like how states have their own constitutions, their own legislature, in Supreme Court, in judicial branch, and all that stuff. And I guess this would be a good time to bring up, and I'm sure that you've already thought this. I know a lot of my subscribers have thought this, and we've talked about this. It's probably no mistake that President Oaks is in the first presidency right now. We've all talked about how President Nelson, he's been working on the heart of the church, making us a Zion people, pure of heart, one of heart. You know, he was a literal heart surgeon.
Right.
And then it would be perfect that we have someone that was literally a judge. He was on the Utah Supreme Court
I've been saying that Oaks is the next Ezra Taft Benson. He's going to come back as or the next Brigham Young, the general. He's Captain Moroni. That's if he becomes prophet, but he doesn't have to be prophet. He's doing things now in the first presidency.
Yeah. So maybe his main mission, as far as like his law background, maybe it's being carried out now in some kind of way. Maybe he'll be the next prophet.
See more of it. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll see more of it. Maybe he'll be a very key leader under Christ in the second coming. Because again, just like we were just talking about, I don't think Christ is just going to give us all the answers necessarily. There's probably going to still be like things that we have to like work out ourselves, and then have
the answers still come through conversion. The answers still come from the Holy Ghost. He doesn't spell things out.
So maybe in the Millennium, it would be Dallin H. Oaks that would be one of the main framers of the Constitution of the world in the Millennium. Because again, if anyone's confused about that, that's what they were doing with the Council of 50. They were trying to draft a constitution for the political kingdom of God,
which involved members and non-members.
Yeah. So he may be one of the main ones that drafts the new one for the Millennium. So there, man, there's just so much to talk about. But
you want to do this again in a month?
Yeah, I think we should.
Okay.
I've kind of narrowed it down. I'm not really doing very many interviews anymore, just a very small list. And it's basically just you, Rabbi Gerfine, and then if we ever talk to Hannah Stoddard, probably her too. And there might be a couple other exceptions.
Actually, I'm going to be doing, Hannah and I are doing something on the 8th. But after that, you and I can do something if you want.
Yeah, that'd be good.
The only reason I've got some stuff I want to talk to Hannah specifically about, we're going to talk about the apologists of the church and we're going to get into the scholars of the church and why they seem to be apologizing for, I don't know if you're familiar with Faith Matters.
Mm-mm.
It's kind of like a platform that's similar to, I don't know. Think of it as like the new MSNBC of church, of church theology or something. It's crazy, man.
That doesn't sound good.
Wokeness and leftist indoctrination is basically seeping into to academia at BYU and in the church.
Yeah.
So yeah. So that's what's going on there. But
yeah, we should do this again like next month. And
yeah,
I think this was a really good conversation. And hopefully, let us know how it went. Everybody, put it in the comments. Was this good? Would you like us to do this every month? Because I think that I would like to. I like talking to Troy. And
I love talking to you.
We'd love to have your input.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't go away. Let me end this, but don't go away.